We have difficult days, we have painful days, confusing days, frustrating days. A lot of us have fearful days and anxious days. And yet today we're going to learn something from King David, that tough days are actually what changed him. The tough days are what made him pray more, seek God more. So join us today as we work through Psalm chapter 17 and learn valuable lessons about our trials in life. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Psalm series. Glad you are joining us today. Today we are on Psalm chapter 17, and it's a reminder, like all the Psalms that we've been studying, that life is tough. Like there are just really bad days and difficult days and confusing days and frustrating days. And a lot of days we feel fear, we feel anxiety. And yet today we're going to see that it's the tough days that actually changed David because he let God change him through it. The tough days made him pray more, seek God more. And the goal for us is to persevere through those difficult days knowing this. In Job 23:10, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. Hence, our backdrop today. I wanted you to see gold. I wanted you to remind you that this is what we're supposed to do, that trials should help us come through like gold. So today I want to start with a story that came from countrywhispers.com. I'm just going to read it and we'll put it on the screen so you can read it along with me. A stranger came by the other day with an offer that set me to thinking. He wanted to buy the old barn that sits out by the highway. I told him right off that he was crazy. He was the city type. You could tell by his clothes, his car, his hands, the way he talked. He said he was driving by and saw that beautiful barn sitting out in the tall grass and wanted to know if it was for sale. I told him he had a funny idea of beauty. Sure, it was a handsome building in its day, but then there's been a lot of winters past with their snow and ice and howling wind. The summer suns beat down on that old barn till all the paint's gone and the wood has turned silver gray. Now the old building leans a good deal, looking kind of tired. Yet that fellow called it beautiful. That set me to thinking. I walked out to the field and just stood there gazing at that old barn. The stranger said he planned to use the lumber to line the walls of his den in a new country home he's building down the road. He said you couldn't get paint that beautiful. Here's what he said. Only years of standing in the weather, bearing the storms and scorching sun, only that can produce beautiful barnwood. It came to me then. We're a lot like that, you and I, only it's on the inside that the beauty grows with us. Sure, we turn silver gray too and lean a bit more than we did when we were young and full of sap. But the good Lord knows what he's doing. And as the years pass by, he's busy using the hard times of our lives, the dry spells, the stormy seasons, to do a job of beautifying our souls that nothing else can produce. And to think how often folks holler because they want life easy. I read that and I thought, that is so incredibly true. Because today we're going to see that David is always in trouble. But in the midst of it, in the midst of a really, really bad situation, what we do see is David's heart. A man who is repentant, a man who has asked God, God, test me. Test me. David wanted to be right with God, and in this psalm, it shows us this. First, let's talk about the background of this psalm. A lot of people think, like most of the other psalms, that the setting was when King Saul was chasing David, trying to kill him because Saul was jealous of him. It seems to be a setting of a lot of the psalms. Look at 1 Samuel 23:25. Saul and his men began to search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. David was always running for his life, it felt like. Verse 26, Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul, as Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them. You can just imagine the fear that David must have had. Saul and his men were chasing him. For you, it could be fear for something totally different. Maybe you're anxious about something that's totally different than someone changing you or chasing you. But the deal is that this psalm shows us what to do no matter what our anxiety, no matter what our fear, no matter what is going on in our life. And the first thing that we learn is that we have to pray. That's like the first #1 key. Because this is the first of 5 psalms that actually say this is a prayer of David. Most of the psalms were like, this is a song to be sung and whatever. It's not like that. This is a prayer. A lot of people think this is a messianic psalm, a prophetic prayer about Jesus. So as we go through this, imagine Jesus praying this in the Garden of Gethsemane. Psalm 17, verse 1. He starts out and says, a prayer of David. Hear, O Lord, my righteous plea. Listen to my cry. Give ear to my prayer. It does not rise from deceitful lips. In other words, David is saying, God, hear my prayer because I'm right with you. Nothing is clogging up that line between you and me. I'm not praying with ulterior motives. I just really honestly need your help. I'm not being selfish. I'm not asking God for a mansion or a Ferrari. I'm praying for help because King Saul is chasing me. And God, you know it as well as I do. That's just not right. Verse 2, may my vindication come from you. May your eyes see what's right. I like this prayer. Some of you need to really grasp this because you're in the midst of maybe a divorce, a court battle. You're being fired because someone lied about you. And you know, I didn't do anything wrong. And you're saying, God, you know that in your eyes, I did what was right. You have to vindicate this situation for me. The great news is God always sees the truth. Verse 3, though you probe my heart and examine me at night, though you test me, you will find nothing. I have resolved that my mouth will not sin. When I read that, I thought, wow, what if we actually live like that? Like watching what we say with our mouth to those around us, even about the person that's hurting us. Are we slandering that person that we're going to court with? Are we slandering the ex-spouse or the ex-boss? It's so amazing because even though David's life was in danger from Saul, he was always confused. He was always angry. But when it came down to it, David was confused, but he never would say bad things about Saul. He would say confusing things like what's wrong with him, but he would never slander him. It's kind of fascinating. We see this scene where David and his men are hiding in the back of the cave and Saul comes in. Saul doesn't know David's there. Saul uses this cave as like his bathroom. David sneaks up behind him and silently cuts off a little piece of King Saul's robe. And David felt such conviction over that. Because he was like, this is God's guy. King Saul is God's guy. And what's amazing is this, he still respected him as the king that God put on the throne, even though he was doing everything wrong. We see this here, 1 Samuel 24:8. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, my Lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. David is on the ground, bowing down to the man who was trying to kill him. He's saying nice things. He's not saying, hey, Saul, you jerk. He's not doing that. He's saying, my Lord, the king. David has so much respect for people, even if those people are hurting him. Verse 9 said, he said to Saul, why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? He's like, I don't know why you're listening to those people. They're telling you, I want to hurt you. Saul, I don't want to hurt you. Verse 10, this day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift up my hand against my master, because why? He is the Lord's anointed. Verse 11, see my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. I think it's just a great time to stop and think about what we say with our mouth. Because David in this psalm links how we talk to if we're right with God. It's so fascinating. Back to Psalms, verse 4 says this, as for the deeds of men, by the word of your lips I have kept myself from the ways of the violent. Words were so important to David. And the word of God, the Bible, should be so important to us. And what we see here is that what David knew about God, what we know about God in his word, is how he patterned his life. And that's how we should be patterning our life after what God says in his word. It would be like David reading this. Proverbs 1:10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not give in to them. Okay, what do we do with that? It's a word from God. Are we going to listen to that, or are we going to just do our own thing? 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. See, when David was right with God, it was because he was taking the words of God seriously in his life. And we need to do the same. Verse 5 says this, my steps have held to your paths. My feet have not slipped. Think of David. He's in the middle of this life and death situation, and it's not his first brush with death. Yet David never walked away from God. He held firm. See, it's easy when things go south in our life. We want to turn away from God. But we don't need to do that. We need to be reminded of something. And it's this, God does hear our prayers. We see this in verse 6. David says, I call on you, O God, for you will answer me. Give ear to me and my prayer. I shared the story about our son, Mike, and his family moving to Texas and the prayer involved in that move. But when it was all said and done, and they ended up moving and how God orchestrated everything, it was just this reminder that God really honestly does care for us. He is intricately involved in the smallest details, like vacations and airline flights. It was so amazing to me as a reminder of what God can do. I learned a lot about when the kids were moving, because there was a lot of days that God felt silent. And I think there was a lot of days in King David's life when David felt that God was being silent. Because for the kids, there were days when they really needed confirmation, like, God, point us in the right direction. There was a day when I actually cried. I was kind of mad at God. Because I'm like, why can't you just tell the kids what to do? They're desperate, they're praying, they need to hear from you. But when it was all over, I laughed. Because I thought, wow, in your silence, you were doing something behind the scenes. In your silence, you were still working, you were reorganizing things, and I just thought you weren't paying attention. But that's actually not true. This psalm reminds us that God is really close, and he really does hear our prayers. Difficult days when God seems silent, those are the times that God gives us an opportunity to see him at work. Because we go back and we look back and we said, wow, I thought you weren't there, but you really honestly were. Verse 7, show the wonder of your great love, you who save by your right hand, those who take refuge in you from their foes. Keep me as the apple of your eye. That is a great verse. The apple of your eye is like your pupil. It represents this precious gift of sight. And it's protected by your eyelid. And so keep me as the apple of your eye was like saying, God, protect me like my eyelids protect my eye. My eyelids protect the pupil of my eye. The second part of that was, God, hide me in the shadow of your wings. He's saying, keep me as the apple of your eye and hide me in the shadow of your wings. This is such a great, great picture of God's protection. It reminded me of when we had two dogs. One was really big and one was really small. And one day there was something that scared the little dog. And he ran underneath the big dog for protection. And it was just this great picture to me, recognizing how big God is and how small we really are. And David says, look, hide me. Like my little dog was hidden under the big dog. God, hide me from my enemies. David might have been remembering some things that he had read about in the Torah, talking about the Israelites, God's people, about being under the shelter of his wings. Exodus 19:4 says, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Deuteronomy 32:9, in a desert land he found him, in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him and cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Isn't that cool? It said that in Deuteronomy. Like the eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them on its pinions. Same language. So David must have been thinking about what God had, what the Torah had said, and it reminded me that he remembered the Word of God, and it helped him in this situation. See, that's why we're supposed to read the Bible, know it, study it, so that we can recall words that are being said that will comfort us at the times when we need to be comforted. The bottom line is this. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are an adopted child of God. He created you. He loves you. He has a plan for you. I want to read this together. Dan Guptill wrote this. He said, you are a masterpiece of the Almighty God. You are not an accident. You are not an oops in the grand plan. And you are an intentional creation of God. He made you who you are, and he made you what you are. Think about it. Think about it. You are a walking, talking miracle. Only God could have made you what you are. Engineers have never been able to come close to devising a machine equal to God's supreme achievement, you. Every minute of your lives, your heart pumps over 5 liters of blood through your body. That's over 300 liters of blood an hour, 7,200 liters of blood a day pumped through a network of 96,000 kilometers of arteries, veins, and capillaries. You probably never think about it, but you represent on the average 5 million hairs, 20 square feet of skin, 650 muscles, 206 bones, 100 joints, 96,000 kilometers of blood vessels, and over 13 million nerve cells. Within you, there is enough fat for 4 cakes of soap. Is it any wonder that David went on to write in Psalms 139:14, thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. He goes on to say this, you are not a mistake or a goof or an accident. You are a divine creation spoken to being by the same God who fashioned the Great Barrier Reef, who molded the Rocky Mountains with his hands, scooped out the Grand Canyon with his fingers, cast the Milky Way into the night sky, and imagined the Northern Lights. And the same God who created the entire universe created me and created you. You are the apple of his eye. Never forget that, because David didn't. He knew that he was created, loved, and that God had a plan for him. And at that moment, David was praying to the God who created him, asking for God's help, because Saul was trying to kill him. He goes on to say in Psalms verse 8, keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings, from the wicked who assail me, from my mortal enemies who surround me. They close up their callous hearts, and their mouths speak with arrogance. They have tracked me down. They now surround me with eyes alert to throw me to the ground. They are like a lion hungry for prey, like a great lion crouching in cover. Can you just feel the fear and the anxiety of David? He's like, God, they're just right there. You have to come through. For Samuel 23:26, we saw this earlier. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them. Verse 13, going back into Psalms, we're kind of flip-flopping back and forth. This is the scenario. David's concerned because Saul's right on his tracks. But look at what his prayer is to God in verse 13. Rise up, O Lord. Confront them. Bring them down. Rescue me from the wicked by your sword. O Lord, by your hand save me from such men, from men of this world whose reward is in this life. You still the hunger of those you cherish. Their sons have plenty, and they store up wealth for their children. And I in righteousness will see your face. When I awake, I will be satisfied with your likeness. David understood that this was a life surrendered to God. If this was the time that David would die, he knew he would see God's face. He would be fine with that. But he also knew that God could miraculously step in, just like he did for Mike and Shayla's house that they wanted in Texas. And if this is the time frame that he wrote this prayer of Saul chasing him, then God did come through miraculously. Remember, Saul's men were chasing David. David could only run so far. I mean, he was really close to them. But out of the blue, look what happens in 1 Samuel 23:27. Right in the midst of this, of getting ready to capture David, a messenger came to Saul saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. Isn't that amazing? God rescued David. So, the lesson to be learned today is this. The next time you're in a really tough place, do what David did. Pray, cry out to God, ask for deliverance. And know this. Know you are the apple of his eye. Know he can deliver you miraculously. And some of you are going, yeah, but he didn't deliver me last time. Well, know this. If he doesn't deliver you, rest in the fact that if you know Jesus, you'll spend eternity in a place far better than this earth. If he doesn't deliver you, he's got a different plan, a different place for you, a different path for you. We can be rest assured that if he does not answer our prayer the way that we think he should, he's doing something different. If in fact someone dies, well, you know what? You're home if you're a follower of Jesus for all eternity. In a place where, guess what? There's no more people chasing you. There's no more court systems or exes or prisons or pain. The more you spend time getting to know God like David did, the more peace there is when life becomes challenging. Hope this psalm helped you today. Have a good day.